Hey guys, I'm going to try to walk you through our lessons from A World of Ideas as quickly as possible, which means there might be two videos here. I'll let you know if I'm about to quit and post another one. And also, I'm going to have to look down at my book a lot, so just bear with me, okay? So, walking you through the idea of Christians in politics. Obviously, it is a big deal right now because we're interacting way more than we're used to with our government simply by obeying their law, the mandates to shut down and stay home, the fact that you're not in school. We're interacting with the government more now than we have been certainly all this year, and really more than what you guys have been used to. I've actually been in a, not a quarantine situation, but a curfew, like a martial law situation after a hurricane before. It's sort of similar to this. I'll give you some ideas about how it is later in this lesson, but just consider the fact that politics is up in our grill right now, and we have to deal with that. And so having a proper understanding of what we're living through, I think will help some of us cope, but it also will help us prepare for stuff in the future and how we should view the political world's impact on Christians. So, first question from A World of Ideas. 3 parts, as always, that some of you guys kind of blew over. I think a lot of you guys corrected those that I sent back. So, what is politics? Politics is a study of governing of cities, nations, or any other association of people. Okay, so politics, we often see it as a bad thing. It's not necessarily bad. It just kind of is. When you deal with people, the word politics is rooted in the word polloi. I want to say that is a Greek phrase. It could be Latin. But it really means we're dealing with people, how you manage people. And obviously there are good politics when you see, and we call that healthy leadership. Sometimes there is bad politics, and a lot of times the bad politics is what we lump into the same category. It's political. I don't like to be political. If you're dealing with people, you have to be political. The quick question that politics seeks to answer is, what is the purpose of government? Why don't we just not elect anybody and just promise to be really cool with each other? Some of you guys have fortunately read Lord of the Flies, and you understand why that doesn't work. But politics does answer when we study it. What is the purpose of government? Why do we have these structures and these systems and these people in place, and what are they doing for us? And finally, what is the key idea of Christian politics? We need to understand that God does institute human government, okay? He places the leaders in their positions to administer justice. Romans 13 refers to it as the sword of God. So it's not like that politics is just a bunch of people who crave power going crazy on us. God actually does establish leadership situations in all nations. Some of them are bad. Some of them are good. Some of them are established for the purpose of judging a disobedient nation. Some of them are established and raised to very high places to demonstrate the glory of God. Egypt and Pharaoh was a good example of that. And others, we like to think that America was established in some sense to guarantee the freedom of people to worship God as they choose. And that was at least a part of the founding philosophies of American government. So we just need to remember that God does establish these things to protect the innocent and punish the guilty. So second, the government is really supposed to protect the rights of people against sinful tendencies. I think the debate with a lot of young people now is that government is supposed to guarantee rights that have not always been guaranteed, the debate about free health care, equitable distribution of resources like capital, money, everybody, just because they have a need, they should be able to get. Well, we have to determine, are those rights that are self-evident, are those rights that are given to us by God? And not all of them are. And so that's always a big debate. But the government is supposed to protect the innocent, punish the guilty, and preserve rights so that people can function really unhampered by anybody. So, question number 2. In what ways does government reflect the nature of God? I know a lot of you are saying, well, it doesn't because government's terrible. Well, kind of. A terrible government is terrible. Not all government is terrible. First, the government does exist to maintain order. We see that with our streets. We see that with our laws. We see that with schedules. We even see that with daylight savings time. So we've lived through a lot of this just in the past 2 weeks. God is orderly, okay? 1 Corinthians 14 really expresses that. Like, God is not a God of chaos. He is not a God of confusion. He ordered the universe. Cosmos, the word for the universe that a lot of people use, cosmos, is a word that means order, okay? And God establishes the moral code and moral laws so that we're not out here, like, abusing each other and driving each other crazy all the time or hurting each other, all right? Second, God is just and fair, and governments, to the best of their ability, need to seek justice and seek to be fair and impartial. Obviously, there's a clash between that and human greed and the worst of human tendencies. And so we have seen historically a lot of governments that are not fair. A lot of people perceive that leaders in our government are not fair. But basically, fairness for all people, so that everybody has an equal shot to live out the life that they choose, is one of the goals of government. Okay? So God is orderly. That's answer number 1. And God is just. That is answer number 2, and how government should reflect the nature of God. Okay. According to Christianity, what are the limits of government? Really, with Christians, we like the government to stay out of our family. We like the government to not tell us how to raise our kids, which is why, and don't tell the collab class I said this, but like, you guys are, private school kids make jokes about homeschoolers, public school kids make jokes about private school kids, and all of them think that they have the way figured out. Here's where I will take up for homeschoolers and private school kids and even public school kids. I don't want the government, I don't want somebody in Washington, D.C. who represents the interest of people in California and people in New York or Seattle dictating to me what I teach my children. Okay? My daughters, I want to have access to a Christian education. I want them to have access to being discipled by me. Not even President Trump's spiritual advisory board. A lot of those guys are clowns. So that's one of those things. The Christians want the government to stay out of their families, and Christians want the government to stay out of their church. I don't want somebody telling me who my pastor ought to be. I want the freedom to go to a church that teaches sound doctrine and is not just supported by the masses, which is one of the reasons that you will hear me a lot of times defend the separation of church and state. Because if the church did pick my church, if the government did pick my church, I have to be concerned about who they're going to put in charge of that church. And from what I've seen, the most popular pastors in America right now, I wouldn't go to their church. I don't want somebody telling me that Andy Stanley is the pastor of Georgia. I just don't like some of the stuff he teaches. I certainly don't want somebody telling me that Rick Warren is the official pastor of America. So for Christians, keeping the government out of our families and keeping the government out of our churches are basically two places where we don't want to see that kind of interference. Now, what does this look like since we're under quarantine and the government has told us not to meet? Is that a mandate that is targeting the nature of the family and the nature of the church, or are those protective measures intended to safeguard everyone? That's one of the questions that we have to ask right now. The government has told us no more than 10 people meeting, especially no large gatherings of like 100 or 150. I don't think in this case that is an interference of our rights, because they're still not defining what the church is or what the family is. But we do have to consider that we are living in a strange time where a greater danger to society has kind of changed the rules. Normally, we would get freaked out if we said, government, don't tell us if we can't go to church on Sunday. Well, the fact of the matter is, if we do show up to church on Sunday, some of us could have, infect 300 or 400 people with coronavirus. So this, I think, is a little different situation. All right. We got a few minutes on this video. What are 2 reasons that the Christians believe the abuse of power is inevitable when it concentrates in the hands of one individual or a small group? So question number 4. Listen, we've seen it for history, first of all. Whenever you place large amounts of power in the hands of a small group, suffering, especially in the 20th century, has pretty much been the result. The nature of sin is something that pulls us downward. Sin is like gravity. The more of it that you get, together, the less likely that people are going to rise up out of it. They're just going to be dragged down into it. Sin is like a disease. If I put a sick person in the room with a healthy person, the sick person is not going to catch health. The healthy person is going to get sick, and sin works that way. So taking people's sinfulness, concentrating a lot of power, a lot of lack of accountability in one group, and just letting them do as they please has historically been disastrous, to the point where it usually means millions of people die. And I hate to sound like over dramatic there, or somebody from like the Daily Wire, but typically Christians do not like the concentration of government, either in one person or small groups. It has never been good. God even said this in the book of Judges, that the people would want a king, the king would rule over them, it would go bad. So the smaller the government, generally Christians think the smaller the government, the better off everybody is. I'm going to do one more question on this video, then I'm going to stop and do another video, so there's going to be 2 parts today. What's the primary difference between a constitutional democracy and a pure democracy? This is the only illustration you need to know. A pure democracy is 2 wolves and 1 sheep voting on what's for dinner. That's one of the best examples I have been told of the problem with a pure democracy. You concentrate massive amounts of people with the same way of thinking, and they can dictate the way things go for everyone else. One of the concerns I have with so many people basically on the left side of politics wanting to eliminate the Electoral College, it would basically put super concentrated urban areas, especially New York and LA, it would put those numbers against the rest of the country. And even though more people on a head-per-head basis would be represented, it would be more people with the same needs and similar lifestyles that would be determining policy for a variety of needs and a variety of lifestyles and a variety of backgrounds across the nation. So the whole thing about typically folks that support like Bernie Sanders or Biden will show a map and complain about the Electoral College and say that, we vote based on the needs of people, not the needs of land mass and stuff like that. Well, it doesn't work that way, because some people it's the way our country is distributed. And if we go to a pure democracy and you eliminate the Electoral College and you just let sheer numbers determine policy, there's no way to protect minorities from what your workbook says is mob rule. That's on page 275. So the 2 words that I'm looking for about a pure democracy is mob rule, and the example that just kind of shows you how that works is, again, the 2 wolves and 1 sheep trying to vote on what's for dinner. You know how that's going to end, and it's not going to end well for somebody. And we've seen that historically. When the mob takes over, when you can convince masses of people to do stuff, you see pretty terrible results, especially if you're in a minority. And Christians, we're the minority now. True Bible-believing Christians that won't sell out their faith for the sake of social order or whatever are no longer the majority. All right, that's the break. This is question 5. We're going to pause, and in the next video we'll cover questions 6 through 11.